The Lenovo Chassis Management Module, or CMM, is a key component in delivering an easy-to-manage flex system bladed environment. In larger configurations, the CMM often operates behind the scenes, with XClarity Administrator providing the primary management console. But in smaller installations, administrators may choose to simply log in directly to the CMM as their primary interface. Let's take a closer look. So from my web browser, I've logged into my chassis management module, and you can see the graphical view of the chassis here. From this map, I can get an understanding of the front of the chassis we see on the left-hand side, as well as the back of the chassis over on the right. And as I select individual components, as you see here, I've selected already this blade in the lower right-hand corner. The lower half of the screen gives me more information about that particular blade. You can see its current tab here is the Events tab, showing me the event log. I can get some general information about the configuration of the system, and I can get into more detail on things like hardware, expanding out underneath this to understand, for example, perhaps I might be interested in understanding my memory configuration and seeing the individual memory DIMMs, and I can get a pretty good amount of detail on each one of those items. And you can see other tabs on here on firmware, power consumption, environmentals, etc. It's not just the blades that I can get information on. If I select one of the chassis switches, for example, here I have an Ethernet switch in the back of the chassis, and once again down the bottom now it's gathering information about that particular component, and I'm seeing things like the hardware events. I can get information on the hardware configuration on this particular I/O module. So again, I'm getting full information and inventory about all the aspects that are inside of my Flex chassis. Another thing I might want to do here is be able to understand and respond to different monitoring activity. So in this case, we can see that I have already identified in the chassis map an issue with one of my blades. You can see the blade indicator red here, and also you can see one of the power supplies showing yellow because it's unplugged. But let's look at this blade a little bit more closely here. So you can see, once again, I've highlighted it, and I can see the event log down here at the bottom. But chances are I might want to get that information delivered someplace outside of the CMM. And so one of the key things we can do with the chassis management module is set up event recipients. So I can go in here, and we can see I have a choice here if I want to create either an email recipient, or I could send Snmp Traps someplace. Let's say I want to send email notification. I could simply enter in a name that I want to call this, and then the email address of where the events are going to get sent. And I have global settings that will identify for me what type of events are going to be forwarded. I might choose to simply forward all the critical and warning events, or I might say, well, this person needs to get access to all of the different events. So I can do email forwarding, I can do Snmp Traps, and I can also set up syslog event forwarding all from this one location. The other thing in terms of letting other people know about problems that are happening is to be able to do our call home. And so underneath service and support, I can come in here and I can set up my call home configuration. You notice right now it says it's not enabled. I can simply check the enable box, and I've already got my contact information identified here. So once this is enabled, if I do have a hardware problem like that power supply failure, the CMM will automatically connect out to Lenovo, open up the trouble ticket, and then Lenovo will contact the whoever's indicated in the contact information to automate the whole call home process. So that shows that I can do some basic inventory, some basic monitoring of what's happening inside my Flex chassis, but I can also perform more active management of my environment as well. So let's go back to that chassis map that we looked at initially, and let's say I wanted to take control over that blade that I'm having an issue with, because I want to find out some more information about what's really happening. So if I select that blade, notice over here on the right that I have a menu of actions. So I can do power cycle, I can power it on, power it off, restart the system. But the one I really wanted to look at here is launching the compute node console. So I have a couple of choices here as well. Initially, I'm going to demonstrate the remote presence choice. So I'm going to launch in here, and this is going to say I want to take control over the console remotely. So you'll notice here that we're going in, we're getting a connection in, and I can see here the operating system page that I would have. And of course, in this case, it's an active hypervisor is running, but if I was in a situation where I wanted to go through the post process and interact with the hardware post process, all of those things would be available for me here. And of course, I also have things like media. So if I needed to mount an ISO image out to that system and reboot it, or have a D drive access, all of that is available through this remote control. Now, in some cases, I may not want to do remote console, but I might want to launch into the detailed management on each one of our blades inside of a Flex environment. Now, we have what we call the XClarity controller. And so I could access that main page for even deeper information about that individual node. As we saw with the CMM, I already have a lot of information about the inventory. I have information about monitoring, which we can see here on this home page. But I might want to get into a little bit more detail. Perhaps I want more detail on utilization. And so we can see here from the XClarity controller chip on each one of these blades, I get a little bit more detail. If I wanted to do the firmware update on the blade itself, I could do that from here, or the server configuration, or the configuration of the XClarity controller itself. So all of those things are available launching from my chassis management module into the more detailed management of an individual object. And then the final thing I might want to do with my chassis management module is update configurations. So if I come over here to my management module pull down, we'll see things like user accounts. Now, in this case, as we log in and we see the list of users that are here, you'll notice the event information here is saying this CMM is currently centrally managed. Right? So this chassis management module is actually being managed externally, in this case by my XClarity Administrator, but it could also be managed by an external LDAP server. And in those cases, and probably a preferable situation there, you don't have to manage local user accounts if you don't want to, if you want to rely on an external LDAP server. If I wanted to, though, and I didn't have that available, I could come down here and create users and have local user access to control who has access to my chassis management module. A couple other configuration changes I might want to make. Perhaps I want to update the firmware on the CMM itself. You can see that's easily done here. And then I can also make changes to my network configuration, again, of the chassis management module. So we'll see a couple of the different things in here. If I was going to set up my Snmp Traps, for example, I might want to set up my trap destination here. If I was going to forward email alerts, I might have to have an SMTP server identified here. If I needed to set up my LDAP, for example, I could identify where my LDAP server is going to be. So all of those things are available here from my network protocol configuration. And for all of these configurations, one of the key things I might want to do, once I get this chassis management module set up just the way I want it, I might want to back up the configuration so I can easily restore it in the future or easily replicate these settings to another chassis elsewhere. So with that, you can kind of see at a high level some of the different things I can do with my chassis management module. Again, it provides me some nice, easy access to rich management within my individual chassis, whether I'm talking about doing things from inventory, health monitoring, performing updates, or actively managing my Flex system blade environment. All those things can be done successfully with the chassis management module.